Yeah, it works much better with these. Good evening. It's 6:02. We're not really going to formally start the meeting because we don't have a quorum. But since we don't vote on anything here and we don't plan on voting on anything, we can proceed with business pretty much as usual. It's October 23rd. This is the police committee meeting, and there are only a few copies of our agenda if anyone wants to grab one. They're up here on this table, but there's not too much on here other than what I assume the majority of people want to discuss, which is the body house law or the disorderly household law. But first thing we have is a congratulation to our new promotion, Mashonda Franklin. I believe that was to a sergeant's position.
Yes.
And she's been on with the department for about 7 years.
Oh no, 14.
14, right? Yeah, double the set. Sorry.
Yeah.
We are looking at candidates for our 25th officer. And I assume, Chief, is that supposed to happen in the next couple of months? You're hoping for?
We're starting to canvass the civil service list for the 25th officer.
Great. So the next item we have 4 other items we're going to zip through and get to the disorderly house. Is the Power DMS, which I can't remember really what
well,
I'm sorry.
It all really comes under, I asked the police committee for some support. It all comes under the budget that I've prepared for next year, which I think is a reasonable budget. But some of the considerations in the budget I'm very interested in. I just wanted to elaborate on them if I could.
Please.
And then when the other committee member, maybe you can pass it on to them, because it's important to me.
I'm sorry, Chief, if any other older person wants to sit down, we have extra chairs.
I'm good.
There's some things in the budget we're trying to be reasonable. We've been at our budget since I've been here, and even with Alice before here, they always try to nail the budget, and they've done a great job over the years. This year, I told you, my overtime is up owing to all the events of the city, but in planning for next year, we've got some considerations, okay? One of the things is realignment of our civilian staff. Our police secretary, Betty Scott, I think has been doing a magnificent job for all these years, but her job has grown, and I think she's overextended. She does secretarial work, clerking work, IT work. You know, one moment you'll see her involved with typing up resolutions, and then we see her out in the car fixing a radio. You know, so I split up the budget to, Betty's looking to retire in December, by the way. So she would be willing to come back as an IT part-time person, or to hire an IT part-time person, maybe at less than 20 hours a week. And then replace her with, instead of a senior clerk, a clerk, which had a lower grade. And then throw on another per diem or part-time position. Because we have an issue in the department, and it has to do with the backlog of evidence, sealing orders, and FOIA requests. So I'm looking to kind of make it more efficient, clear up our backlog, and I've worked that into the budget. And it's very close to the existing salary we're paying out just for the one position. So I want some support on that. And we can always elaborate on that, but I met with the BEA, and I think we got some kind of support. The other thing is something called Power DMS, okay? So what that is our police policies. When police departments in the Hudson Valley, maybe in everywhere, started to write policy, it seems like there was one policy manual that must have come out. And over years and years, every police department has subtracted, added, until it becomes a mishmash of policy. And this order was given in '93 and rescinded in '97 and reinstituted in 2001. It's a mess. So I've gone to different police conferences and stuff, and I really think the way to go is to, and for the liability of the city too, is to let's get our policy sharpened up. Let's reduce it, make it more efficient and streamlined. Let's have it vetted by an attorney that's available to us, and let's keep our policy updated with new laws. So much of police involves training and the introduction of new laws and making sure that your officers are aware of the new laws and trained on it. So it's an integrated system that reduces our policy, has it vetted. It's about an 18-month to 2-year process to take our policies, have them reviewed, vetted, streamlined. And then there's a training module attached to it. So a police officer comes into work one day, he's logging on his computer, and a small training module might come up about some recent law, hate crime, or even a dog bite, or whatever. That officer will receive training on his computer. That training will be logged into his training file, and his performance will be looked at and all that other stuff. So it's a way of modernizing something that's really 19th century stuff. I think in our manual somewhere, it still has where we go down and check the water level at the river every day. Okay, you know, we need to get to the 21st century here, and really for the protection of our officers, protection of the city, and also to have better trained officers that are up to date on new laws, current laws, use of deadly physical force, everything. It's a much better system. It's really important to me, and I've put that in the budget to try to get that going over here over the next 18 months or so. If we can accomplish that thing, it sounds boring and everything, but it really is a great accomplishment. It's it'd be one of the things I'm most proud of, is if we can somehow update something that's been out there in the same form for probably 75 years. Okay? And it's just a mess. We bring a new officer in, they have to learn our policies and stuff. It's a manual this thick. We need to really get streamlined and better at that stuff. And then the other thing, it really doesn't have to do with the budget, is we did receive a grant for body cameras. So I'm requesting the city to, it's a matching thing, where we get $10,000, the city puts in $10,000. But what that would give you is body camera, soup to nuts, everything that we need to outfit every member of our department.
Including yourself? Including
myself, I have a body camera, so. I'm really looking forward to that. It's something we've discussed it for how long? A couple of years now.
At least 2 years.
So we're lucky enough to receive a grant, and I think we should jump on it. So I was looking for community support, committee support as we go forward in the budget process.
Great. Sounds like a great thing.
Yep.
Thank you. I guess that's about it, unless anyone has any questions on those past little items we discussed. Yes?
Real quickly, Steve.
And I'm sorry, please name and
Oh,
address.
sorry, Steve Ford. You might look at cities that have recently redone their police manuals, and just that'll give you a head start to obviously change it to fit what you guys have, rather than inventing the wheel from scratch, which sounds like a nightmare.
Right, it is a nightmare. There's 2 attorneys that the Chiefs of Police Association recommends, 2 groups, and the one that I'm interested in is based out of Connecticut. They have quite a resume. They went through, I think it was, of all places, the state of Tennessee, and redid all the policies for that entire state. So I know it comes recommended by all the Chiefs Association throughout New York State. It's something we have to look into. We're just in the budgeting process now. But it's handled by an entire legal firm, so thank you.
I'm just hopeful that maybe there's some municipality that's done what you want to do.
Right. There's several in New York State that have used these different firms, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our last issue is the disorderly household law. Would you like to give us a little overview? And then
well, sure. I think there's kind of there's a lot of public concern about it, and I do acknowledge that. Folks need to be wary when there's a new law in town. But I'll just give a brief history so we can open up the discussion. At this police committee meeting, there was discussion, as you might remember, about what can be done about some of the issues in the city. And one of the things that was brought to me by the public was the enforcement of this city code section, the 188.5. I said, sure. I said, we will start to enforce it. At the same time, I think there was an election and a new city attorney who immediately reviewed the law and basically put a hold on it and said, look, this law is antiquated. It's not applicable to modern times. wasn't what the intent was, because the discussion at the time was, hey, let's go after some landlords that are allowing this to happen on their premises. So that was in fact done, and I think just recently the new law was proposed. So I want to give it perspective. I did some research in our computer the best I could, and over the last decade, HPD has actually used this existing law 3 times. So it's obviously not high on our priority list. We haven't exercised that law and other laws in the code in that grouping. But it's interesting to me that only 3 times has any landlord been issued a ticket. Going forward, the discussion was, how do we make folks accountable for their conduct on their property? And in the meantime, in the interim, since before this law was proposed, I've met with several, I'd say probably 4 landlords, 4 or 5 on that block. Generally what happens with the police department is we enforce a lot of code, open container, loud music, we write tickets. Instead of 3, somewhere to the tune of 700 or so over this time period. We will go to a house traditionally, we'll go to a house and say, hey, turn the music down, or get off the porch, or just go quiet down, or whatever. And then maybe the next time we'll go and might issue some tickets for open container, which we've done quite a bit of, or something along that line. Only, and since my experience here it'd be the last thing to go to the landlord and say, look, if you don't break this situation up, you're going to be responsible and you're going to get a ticket. And I think that's what the intent of the law was when it was written up. So as we go forward, we'll see what happens with it, see if it's utilized more than we've traditionally done.
Thanks. Any older persons want to comment before we get to the audience? Mr. Friedman, please.
Can I come up now?
Please do.
Because I have notes. I did homework. I guess about a month ago, this issue arose, and Andy Howard was asked to draft something, which he did. He actually drafted 2 laws. The first one he and I looked at and decided it was too broad. This last one, number 7, Andy also worked on, and I tried to give him some guidance. I don't know if we did much better. So I stepped back. I was away last week, and I apologize that I wasn't here to discuss this with the council. But I came back yesterday and today I did a little work, and so I just stepped back and I tried to understand what the existing laws are, and what other municipalities are doing. And I got a good lead on a law from Syracuse, which I think is useful to us, but I'll get there in a moment. So right now, essentially there are 3 chapters of the Hudson City Code that apply, as far as I can tell, to issues dealing with public nuisance, and that's what we're talking about. The first is Chapter 188, which deals with lewd and offensive behavior. Chapter 192 deals with loitering, and Chapter 210 deals with noise. That's all I'm going to say about Chapter 210. It doesn't really have any application to us here. It's useless. It's just not a good, well-drafted piece of law. So 188 really is the meat and potatoes of the existing Hudson City Code, and Section 5, as the chief said, deals with disorderly house. And that's, I think, here, I think I can almost give it to you verbatim, having read it twice. It basically says you can't keep a disorderly house, or a house of ill fame, which I believe means a brothel in 19th century speak and early 20th century speak. And anybody who does is liable under the law. And it sets out some penalties, not more than $250 or 15 days in jail. So there is this quasi-penal aspect to it. And then that's why the fact that the law doesn't define what a disorderly house is really problematic. So I would just lay that out there. Section 9 of Chapter 188 deals with disorderly people, and Section 12 with public intoxication, and those are pretty self-explanatory. But again, there's no definition of public intoxication, and there's the concept of disorderly person is intuitive. It can be intuited in Section 9 from the surrounding sections, but I don't think that's necessarily good lawmaking either. So it's weak. As it stands. Section 192, or Chapter 192 rather, dealing with loitering, literally defines loitering as hanging around, and I don't think that's very helpful, particularly when we're trying to keep a street culture in a city. So I find, Section 192 is really difficult to apply in any kind of meaningful way for the police, and I think that it also doesn't require a intent, and that'll become an issue as we go through the analysis. Again, Section 210 or Chapter 210 dealing with noise really doesn't have any application here. And that brings us to the New York State Penal Law, which I think the Chief alluded to earlier, which does empower the police or the sheriff or just about anybody actually, because it's a state law, so any agency that enforces state laws can enforce this section, dealing with, and it's Section 240.45 of the Penal Law, which creates a Class B misdemeanor known as criminal nuisance in the second degree. And the second, Part B of that, defines the crime as maintaining any premises, and they use a lot of other definitions for the word premises, but a place, quote, where persons gather for purposes of engaging in unlawful conduct. It's not 100% helpful if our definitions are lacking. So while 240.45 does give the police or any agency a really big stick, the predicates that have to be shown are kind of lacking because the city code is lacking. And I think analysis that concludes that, well, we have these laws on the books and they're good enough is really not correct for that very reason, because it essentially defangs the big stick, and it also forecloses any smaller stick, and I think maybe that's what we're looking for. I don't know. It's not my decision much longer, so all I can do is report to you. I will say that under the penal law, I mean, this is a Class B misdemeanor, and that means you can get up to 90 days in jail, and that's the owner or the tenant or whoever's in control of that property as the police determine. The law seems to require some notice to the property owner, but it doesn't mandate how that might work, and I think that might be somewhat problematic, and the police can certainly come up with their own procedures, but if we as a community think that we should have some standardized procedures, this is the body that should create it, this committee, and then the whole city council working with the police committee. So, the existing laws, the lack of definitions in Section 188.5 is really a problem, and then as we start looking at what other cities have done rather successfully, and I think Syracuse is a pretty good example because they use it very rarely. It does carry a big stick. It does set out the predicates for the penal law application, but it also creates a notice requirement and a process, and it requires consultation between property owners and the police. It's mandated. It takes it out of anybody's hands to guess how it should be done, and it just says what should be done. And I think that'll help people understand how the law should work. And it also makes it, I think, easier for the police then to enforce it, because they're basically told, do it this way. And as long as they do it that way, as long as the law itself can be upheld, then everything should be enforceable. So those are triggers to the definition of disorderly house within the Syracuse law. So rather than finding that there is a disorderly house, what the Syracuse law says is, if these things happen, or any combination of these things happen within a certain period of time, and it refers to both their local statutes about nuisance as well as New York State statutes about nuisance. It says if there's an arrest or 3 calls to 911, not for assistance, not because you need the police, but because people are calling about you, but not about domestic violence, and I think that's because there's an entire body of law and enforcement around and surrounding domestic violence issues, then you are a disorderly house. And then New York State Penal Law 240.45 can come in. And before that determination can be made, there's notice from the police, and there's a mandatory meeting. If the landlord doesn't show up, then they get hit with the penalty automatically. I think some of the problem that's happened in the city, anecdotally over the years, it's impossible to get statistics, is that both code enforcement and the police issue summonses and citations, and people ignore them, or they allow them to rack up because they know that they're not going to be properly enforced, just anecdotally, and they go into the courts, and the courts knock these fees down to the baseline for one reason or another. I don't know how I can necessarily find out. Yesterday was Sunday, and today was my first day back working week. I was pretty busy, but and Brandon, who's helping me, who's an assistant in my office, helped me with a lot of this research today, and I thank her for that. If anybody's ever been arrested, or anybody's in jail right now under any of the existing city laws, because I think that they are pretty broad, and that the city would have a difficult time defending some of them if they were challenged. So I do think they're deficient. I do think something needs to change in them. Simply relying on them, I do not think will get people what they want. And I want to step back and say that I think that the Syracuse law should be studied by this committee with the police department and the whole council. And I don't think it's something you can necessarily do in what's time's left to this particular council, but I don't think it's work that should wait either. Because it's not particularly difficult, it's just going to be a little time consuming. I think that the people who live in these affected communities have real issues, and that the council needs to do something to provide that medium-sized stick. Because clearly people are concerned and people are fearful, and I don't think that we should take that lightly or allow that to continue any longer than we have to. So that's what I got. I'm happy to forward the Syracuse law to you. It came to me from Mr. Rector, who got it from Rebecca Wolf, I believe, and I thank her for sending that to us. I'm sure there's other municipalities that have done this successfully, and I'm happy to do anything else that I can do to help while I'm still here. That's all I got.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could add, what John's alluding to is that HPD, in order to make an arrest and prosecute successfully, we would have to establish what it means to permit, keep, or maintain these residents. It isn't like you could go there the first time, there's a bunch of people hanging out, you're under arrest, here's your fine. It doesn't work that way. We would have to establish a course of conduct against the local sensibilities. We'd have to actually go in there and document before we could actually go after the landlord. And a couple side notes, the landlords that I spoke with, who are own some of our problematic houses, don't live in Hudson, okay? They don't live at the residence that we are interested in and have problems with. And lastly, this Chapter 188 has other laws in it that are equally enforceable, that I think are equally something that the police department really wouldn't use as a lever to invade people's privacy. One being, we don't go after incarcerating people maintaining an unsafe hole, or a dilapidated vehicle on their property, or burning leaves. So, I mean, they're all in the same category of crime, all under the same chapter. So it's all about how the law is written, like John says. It has to be well-defined. It has to do with how it's enforced.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Rector.
Yes, hi. Thank you all. Rick Rector, Alderman for the First Ward. I just want to quickly, excuse my voice, I'm kind of losing it tonight, clear up some wrong information. It was reported in one of the recent editions of our local newspaper that Rick Rector and Claudia DiStefano drafted this law, when in fact I don't draft laws, nor does Claudia. During the last police committee meeting, Chief Moore mentioned that he'd been waiting for the legal committee since January to give him some version of the law that he could work with. After that meeting discussion, nothing ever happened, and our assistant city attorney, Andy Howard, said, I'll draft the legislation. So just to keep everyone clear about that, I had nothing to do with that. That was our assistant city attorney. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Bill, anything? I obviously, sorry.
Wait and see what happens and find out what that, how they did theirs.
I'll forward it.
I never received your email, sorry.
I'll send it again, and yeah, I suggest that you all take a look at it, and it's, you can't just put it out, because it refers to their laws, but.
And and definitions aside, that's on its own a huge issue for our code and charter.
Yeah, well, you know, at the end of the day, the penal law requires a showing of intent beyond reasonable doubt, and the way our laws are drafted now, I don't believe that any prosecutor would be able to meet that bar, and so it would be a meaningless exercise, which would either breed a lot of useless and meaningless overtime, and/or certainly contempt for the law. So.
Yes. Okay. Now we'll open it up to the audience members who are here. Please remember to state your name and your address for the record. Thank you. Mr. Dunn.
Steve Dunn of the 4th Ward. As I understand it, this legislation is really directed to landlords. It's broader than that, but it's really directed to landlords. And out of the box, operationally, I have trouble understanding how it could work. The tenants presumably have a lease, which may or may not have provisions in it prohibiting bad conduct. So what is the landlord, and so there's all these citations and 3 phone calls or whatever, out of the Syracuse legislation. And what is the landlord supposed to do? Commence an unlawful detainer action?
All New York residential leases, as a matter of law, are voidable due to illegal activity on the part of the tenant. So they could commence a
So is that the cleansing mechanism? Because if the landlord attempts to evict the tenant, is that a defense in this legislation? Because the practicalities of how this will work concern me. Plus, this is all anecdotal, I don't know if it's true, but I hear that the local courts are sometimes reluctant to enforce these provisions in a landlord-tenant context and will not kick out a tenant who's been a disorderly person, or whatever term you want. So,
I don't doubt that that's probably the case on an initial complaint. Because New York, in my experience, New York State courts are loath to put residential tenants on the street for almost any reason, and tend to view residential landlords as private social service agencies in that regard. But 2, 3 times, and also the cost of defending, and certainly any tenant who's threatened either by their landlord or by operation of penal law section 2040.45, or if the city had an effective disorderly house law that sort of tracked or modeled that, would be able to get, I believe, an injunctive relief at the very least, pending a fact-finding hearing on the merits.
Finally, I'm concerned about criminalizing this and throwing landlords in jail to the extent there's some efficacy and appropriateness to this that doesn't prove highly divisive in the city. It seems to be it should be more of a civil matter rather than a criminal matter. That's all I have to say. Maybe put it in the zoning code. But throwing landlords in jail...
That's a state law. No, it's not the local law, it's the state law.
Well, those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
I've got a question for the council.
Sorry, your name, please.
My name's Ed Stoller. I'm a building owner in Hudson.
Thank you.
My concern is, it seems to me like we're going down the wrong track here. You're holding a landlord responsible for the property. Now, if they're running a brothel, if they're running a gambling casino, or some sort of drug den, I understand that. But if he has tenants in that building that the landlord truly doesn't have responsibility for directly, It's just a lease. It's a contract. And very difficult to enforce. Now, if something goes on in the building, it's the landlord's responsibility to try to correct it. But if it's a criminal case, how the hell is the landlord going to be held responsible for this?
I don't think the landlord could, because you wouldn't be able to show them
But the thing is, we're missing the point here. You're chasing the wrong course. This is not the landlord we should be chasing. We should be addressing what's going on in the city.
Nobody's chasing anything.
No, well, you are.
Talking.
You are. You're putting the onus on the landlord.
I'm not putting the onus
Well,
on anybody.
whatever this meeting is putting an onus on the landlord.
Sir,
It is saying that-
interrupt for a
excuse me.
second.
I'm reading as the landlord is responsible, or should be responsible. And I do agree with you for the building.
I just want to cut you off for a second and continue. We, as the chief said, we aren't enforcing this
Right.
currently, and as John said, we don't have anything
I understand
to
that.
any sort of, that we're at the beginning stages of everyone's concerns, so these can all be put in this.
I, as the landlord, say to you that if I have a tenant who is a problem tenant, and if the answer is, my getting rid of this tenant is just going to go to another building. It's not going to change the issue. It's not going to make them not be a drug dealer or shoot somebody in the street. It has no effect on it whatsoever.
It has an effect on where they do it, sir, and that's...
Also, instead of doing it on 5th, they do it on 4th. That's the answer.
Sir, no, but that's part of the issue that's trying to be addressed. Yeah, of course, it's a game of whack-a-mole, I guess, at some level. But the answer doing nothing, for the people who live in those...
I'm not
Sir, I let you speak, I didn't cut you off, right? So,
Okay.
I think that what we're trying to understand is
Yeah.
how you begin to escalate. And certainly, I think, when we spoke today to the folks in Syracuse, spoke to the police department in Syracuse and the community liaison officer for the area around where the frat houses are, because that's where this law happens to be used the most in Syracuse, and that's what it was designed for in Syracuse. And it's the last thing that they do is go for the property owner. They go after it's an escalation, and you go after the people who are doing the things. But at a certain point, the laws that deal with individual normative behavior cease to be functioning, and so then you look for collective, and at some level, a landlord is always responsible for what happens in their building, even the illegal activity, and that's why the landlord has the power to void a lease where there is illegal activity happening in the apartment. That's absolutely the reason why
As
that
someone in this room raised earlier, I think a gentleman over here, if you have to take a tenant to court to get them out of your building, forget the cost factor. We're not even addressing that issue. Forget the fact that you have a legal right in the sense that you have addressed the fact that the tenant is a bad tenant, causing a problem for the other tenants, whatever it may be. It's almost impossible. It's very difficult in this town. It's very difficult in the town of Hudson to do that. So these are issues that you should be addressing.
Well, it's difficult everywhere in New York State, in my experience. It's just really hard to get residential.
Can't speak for New York State, only for Hudson.
This law, well, the penal law is
We're a small
used in
town.
New York State.
We're a small town. We're not the state of New York.
Thanks for the lecture. But
obviously.
the geography, right? Yeah, I agree. But the penal law is state. Hudson doesn't have a penal law.
My only point is the onus of putting it onto a landlord.
That the state legislature did.
It may be state legislature, but the onus of putting it on a landlord is ludicrous.
Well,
May I ask
That's
a
not
question?
Jesus.
You should take that argument to Albany.
May I ask one question? So your argument is that a landlord has no responsibility?
No, I'm not saying that
Okay,
at
so
all.
it's a
I have
matter of
responsibility.
degree, then we're arguing, and that's what I think we're trying to say.
But if I can't do anything about it, what do I do? If I have a responsibility and I can't carry out that responsibility, what do you suggest we do?
The law, and it hasn't in its final iteration, says permit, keep, or maintain. So the question is, what do you do with a landlord that's not willing to work with the city of Hudson? And that's what we're addressing here. I'll give you an example, and that's why we're on the same page there. You know, one of these, and remember, I'm addressing the concerns of neighbors.
Right.
So one of the, I won't say which one, but there's a residence on State Street that we've been to 57 times this year. Okay, we're looking, we're looking for a we do. Now, the people, you know, tenants in there have been cited for open container and marijuana and everything like that. It's just not helping the neighborhood.
Can't they be taken off the street?
Yeah,
That's
I'm with
the
you there,
object,
brother.
isn't it?
I'm with you there, but we have to operate within the law. We issue the tickets. A lot of these things are minor violations. One person at that residence has 37 arrests. We're just doing our job. We're looking for some help. I think we would all agree that we want to improve it for the neighborhood. And that's what we're talking about. This isn't a thing going against landlords, and it's not just landlords, it's also tenants. But we do have those problematic homes, and there's not that many in the city of Hudson, but we do have those where we go in repeatedly, and the person in control of those premises says, "Get lost. You know, we're not going to help you, we don't care."
It's actually easier for, sorry, it's a lot easier in my experience too for landlords in Hudson, because most residential tenants are month to month in Hudson. And so with 30-day notice and the tenancy is over, you don't have to wait for the year, you don't need a reason. You just have to wait till the end of the next billing cycle, and if they stick around...
It doesn't work like that, sorry.
Well, it does work
Not
like
true.
that.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely does.
Not in reality.
It doesn't reality.
Hypothetical.
Come call me, you need a good lawyer.
Excuse me, you're right. It still takes 30 days to get your notification. It takes another 30 days to go to court, and another 30 days.
It doesn't take 30 days.
The guy who's paying you.
It doesn't
By the
take
time you
30
finish,
days.
it's 4 months.
I'm talking to landlords, I've heard
Come and see me.
both, and I'm woefully ignorant on this process. Okay, so I've heard, now I've had a guy with the same amount of enthusiasm tell me it's extremely easy. So I think that the next thing is to look into really what is the reality.
I
If
agree.
you have a problematic tenant, how does the city and how do you fix the situation to improve the neighborhood? And like I've heard both sides of it, I don't know.
Sir, thank you. I see a woman's hand in the back.
Yeah, hi. My name is Jean Stoller, and actually Ed and I own one of the buildings where there's been a lot of issues. And we've had some meetings with the commissioner, and we're very concerned, but we're also a little fearful about repercussion towards us. But what I'm wondering, if there isn't a way to establish some kind of communication between the police department and landlords, and letting them know if they come to your property. I mean, we didn't know this was our building till we read it in the paper. I mean, it seems like we should have been notified. And if there would be a way somehow where you could, I know you can go on, you know, these searches and everything and try to vet these people, but a lot of these people, you know, some of the tenants don't come up. And if there's a way that the police department could share information, maybe not say exactly what the offenses are or something, but say if there could be a clearinghouse, you know, that this is a bad tenant, good tenant, you know, I don't know if that's legal.
You're talking about vetting them,
But that
basically.
would really...
Somehow vet the tenant. And there's no way we
In
can
my
do
experience, I
that.
always ask my tenants some, I guess you'd call it maybe a recommendation from a past landlord.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to
I
put
can
the
show you
onus
the
on the landlord,
pages.
but
I'm in real estate. I have leases that are like this long.
yeah, we're in the same
Yeah, it
business.
doesn't
Well, there are
help.
background check services specifically for landlords.
Yes.
That look at arrests and evictions and exactly those sort of things. I know TRW has,
Right.
and I don't know.
Well, I've never had to use them before because
I've used
we've
them
had great
for
tenants,
clients.
you know, and
They're not too expensive. It's like $45.
the person who lives in this building, from our knowledge and the way she has been a tenant, we inherited her. We've had the building 8 years or something.
Yeah.
Perfect tenant. No one ever complained that we know of. Now, maybe there were complaints, but we had no idea.
Just to address your original fears about getting arrested without the police, there's no way we can establish intent and that you intend to maintain a premises like this and prosecute you without at least communicating to you and establishing a course
No,
of
that
conduct.
wasn't my question. My
Okay.
question was if we could know if the police have been called because of disorderly conduct, so we can take a step. There is a letter that you can send out as a landlord to give someone notice that they aren't adhering to the lease terms. So if we don't know that the police have been to the premises, then we can't do that. So that's what the issue I was referring to. But I think it's very important that that there's some kind of bill drafted that works both ways. But I don't understand as a layperson if all these people are known doing drugs and they're smoking pot, or maybe pot isn't such a big offense anymore, I don't know, in the street and people call up about it. I mean, isn't that...
Here's the thing, we do, and we repeatedly cite, but in the February raid of your premises, there was 11 gentlemen smoking pot in your building.
Right. Okay,
That's a drug den.
That's the first time I've heard of it, yes.
But how was it in the paper? I'm not a landlord. I'm not in the landlord business.
But no,
I don't know how you would know that. And is it on me to notify you?
Yes,
That, hey,
you're there.
okay, fine.
Then somebody should...
Fine, that'll be in the law then.
Yeah, there you go.
Ma'am, that is a very good point that you make about an incident potentially being passed along to a building owner. And maybe it
Yes.
could be put into this. Seems like,
I think,
we're at such a preliminary
if
stage
you're
where
going to hold the landlord responsible,
they should know about it.
we should know about it, and we don't live in the building because it's a rental unit.
But I think as the chief said, in order, the penal law requires intent. The only way to determine intent is through talking to people, because you probably, even if it was your desire to have a drug den building, you wouldn't put an ad that says, have your drug den here.
No, but...
Low rates, right? So you would hear from them. And then they'd be able to look at you and they'd say, you seem like a nice lady, your husband seems like a straightforward guy, it's probably not your intent, you just didn't know.
Right.
Now you know.
Now we know, okay.
And so they'd work with you. I think that, we are a small city, and so there is the ability to have this level of communication. The charter only requires the chief to show up here every 6 months, he comes every month, because it's a small town.
Right,
and
no,
we do
I
have this level of
understand that.
communication.
But, my point is, if the law does hold landlords responsible, then they need to have the information that there is an issue with their property.
Well, that's, as I said, that's the state law, the state law. Right?
Okay.
The city law, we don't have a law that holds
But even
landlords
if there's
responsible right
no
now,
law,
as far
I
as
think
know.
most landlords would like to know if this is...
I don't think that's unreasonable, because we're not talking 28 houses here.
No, I know, yeah.
I don't think that that's out of line. I mean, we're talking a few houses, and I've already met with the landlords, including yourself.
Right, yes, yeah,
So it's just a matter of
yeah,
extending the conversation one step further.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sir, in the gray shirt, then we're going to the corner, and then Tiffany, you were after.
Hi, my name is Chris Blair on North 3rd Street. Appreciate the information. This sounds like a residential issue, but how does it apply commercially? I understand the concern with certain areas in certain locations, but as far as commercial space goes, art galleries that are, you're not going after art galleries where people are drinking and smoking dope outside. And
I've heard people drinking at art gallery, yes I have.
and I get it. I understand the problem, and it is a problem. And I think addressing the problem in a safe way for everyone, that doesn't make people afraid to participate in being part of a community, but also it being so broad concerns me for being a member of the community. Am I safe in my own home? I don't engage in illegal activity in my home, but am I safe in my home? If I gather and I'm loud, I get it. There's a process. There needs to be a process. But I guess coming back to my question is, how does this apply to commercial bars?
Same.
Art galleries?
So the penal law doesn't, the state penal law doesn't make a distinction between the type of property. The city law doesn't define a disorderly house, but it uses the word house. That may mean something. Then it talks about houses of ill repute, which, that's a different kind of house, but it's still a house. So, again, the city law is so undefined as to be essentially almost, not really worthwhile. I think that the city would probably end up finding itself at the receiving end of a lawsuit if it tried in a kind of systematic way to apply it. That's just my guess. I don't know.
But understand, the law's been on the books for 100 years, and we've demonstrated we haven't been overreaching. Okay, so I think, you know, three tickets written in a decade, it's not a lot. So the question is, as the law gets developed, all those concerns addressed. You know, that we just aren't going to come up to your art gallery and you're having a thing just, you know, start giving tickets out.
I'm not an art gallery owner, but speaking facetiously, and it's clear that times are changing. You know, the climate is changing. And as just speaking personally, I'm concerned with that. And it seems like everyone here is on board with that, you know, and giving, we need to have police. We need safety.
Well, that's comforting.
We need public safety. We need public safety to serve and protect our community. But really, for my own self, my feeling of safety doesn't come from the police. It comes from my community. And having the community feel safe is very important. And I get, within my own neighborhood, people don't feel safe. People don't feel safe for what's happening on the street, but also what's happening with the climate around us.
And our conversations come full circle because this entire discussion was started by people coming to this meeting saying, look, we live on State Street, we live on North Church, and we don't feel safe. And that's how this whole, that's the genesis of this whole conversation.
And I very much appreciate that, and I understand that problem. And there's many problems that need to be dealt with, and this sounds like a specific location that is an issue, but giving the right to go after a specific location then opens the door to go to any location. And doing that safely, I think, is very important, which sounds like it's happening, but I look forward to seeing what's get drafted and participating in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
I'm John Albany. I live on State Street. I'm a resident of Hudson as well as a building owner and a landlord. And I want to say thank you for doing research on the Syracuse law. I would be much more comfortable supporting a law like that, like the one that you described, as long as it had a provision for landlords to be notified of any incidences involving their renters. I also wanted to say a couple of other things. One is there's something that's gone largely unsaid at this meeting, that in the past 3 to 6 months, there's been serious gun violence going on basically the State Street area. And that resulted in severely injuring women and children. And that's a serious climate there. And right now, the police have done everything they can, and Chief Moore has been really wonderful with everything. But their hands are kind of tied. They've done everything they can. He mentioned all the, all the arrests and things that have happened, and that's not enough. The city of Hudson and the police force needs, they need another tool, a stronger tool to be able to help.
Can I address that before we go?
Oh, absolutely.
The residents have been more than patient with me. I keep coming to these meetings and I say, you know, stay the course, be patient. Then in a couple of meetings, something's happened after that. The only thing that I can say without compromising an investigation and shooting off my big mouth is, look, at some point, there's going to be a resolution. And the resolution is that the chief and the department address this thing. Or it's going to be the chief and his department, and with help, did not address it. At that point, all cards will be on the table, and then I imagine you folks will hold me accountable. That's the way it works. These things are difficult and take time, and I've asked folks to, hang in there, and I'm asking it again. I say that even knowing that another shooting could happen. They might come down to 701 police station with torches and pitchforks to get me out of there. But at some point, everything, all the truth be laid on the table as to what's happened, what we've put into it, and what the resolution was. And I just ask, until we get to that point, if people could just hang in there with me and support and do as they have. I talk to a lot of people every day, and they want to see results, and I 100% understand that. But at some point, I'm gonna have to be accountable, and I also understand that.
Right, but what I was saying was that I think your police team has really so far only been given Band-Aids. A law like this in Hudson, or a similar law, will give the police force a larger tool to be able to address the issues that we have with drugs and related issues, particularly with that part of town. And something else I wanted to mention was also that I think a lot of people are concerned about the reach of this law. This law, from the way that I see it, is not about, you know, a few loud kids spilling out of the half moon or anything. It's more about really making the town safer, eliminating the drug dealing, prostitution, because there's also prostitution going on that street, and also the guns and the gun violence. So I think that's just really important. And unless you live in the State Street area, it's really difficult to understand what goes on there. I mean, if you live on a nicer street, on a quieter street like Allen or Union, it's just walk a couple blocks, it's like a world apart. And it could be quiet for a few weeks and then it flares up again. So this law is really important.
Thank you. Tiffany, I believe you were next.
Yes, well, I'm hearing everyone's concerns, and it's adding to what I have to say now, but I am Alderman Garriga from the 2nd Ward, and I wanted to ask Chief Moore, when you stated earlier, when you have all these tickets that you have to give out 37 times to an individual, what happens when that individual goes to court? I mean, after a certain amount of time, doesn't that individual have to go to court, and then it's up to the court what happens if they go to jail or anything else of that nature?
Generally, you know, it's a Band-Aid thing. When guys are hanging out on in front of a building and drinking, and we cite them for open container or UPM or something, or marijuana smoking or something, they'll pay the fine. Like John alluded to, I'd have to go into the court records and see exactly how it's adjudicated. Is it $150 fine knocked down to $25? I really don't know right now to tell you, but they get ticketed and they go in and I assume pay the fine or don't pay the fine sometime and then get picked up again, or maybe they fail to appear. You know, so much of what we do in the department is to go out and pick up people that we've already picked up, okay, for failure to appear. Many of our warrants for picking people up to 2 and 3 times.
And that's a misdemeanor?
Violations. Mostly these kinds of violations. So it's really a ticket.
So, and these individuals, you know, do they have a backyard or they just sitting in front of their home?
Some of the complaints that we get come from the backyard area, some come from the front yard, and, you know, disorderly conduct doesn't always apply because you're on private property, you're not on public property. So it all depends on the instance. But we're not, I want to go back to the fact, we're not talking about 25 homes here. Half dozen. And then we have to establish repeat, and we can show how many times we've gone to one residence. You know, we have, not in this mode, but in a domestic violence mode, a domestic incident, we've been to one home 115 times. So, you know, I will tell you, knowing how many places we've been to repeatedly, it's only maybe a half dozen, 4 or 5.
And that 115 times was each time that you were called out because of something going on, or because it was just neighbors thinking something was going on?
Well, it's a little bit of both, I suppose, in all those. But we always go, you know, and document and this kind of stuff. And I think with the way this law eventually gets drawn up, we'll have to document. Look, we've been to this house X amount of times, we spoke to the landlord X amount of times, and this is before we could even think about writing another ticket.
You know, I think it's great that, you know, a lot of people are here tonight. It seems like a lot of building owners are here. I know there are a lot of people in the city of Hudson that are not building owners, they're tenants, but they're extremely concerned because with the rents rising and just this, you know, with this law that may or may not come out depending on the way it's written, this is another thing to have people in fear of losing their homes, let alone not being able to afford rent. You know, it's a huge concern. So I would hope that you continue these, you know, discussions with the community and not just, you know, tonight, because it needs to be addressed more Also, you know, I'm hearing about the smoking and drinking, and I know as a landlord, some of that is on the application, you know, no smokers, right? That can be addressed in that simple manner. But
Just tell folks that nothing in this local code usurps the criminal procedure law. I can't raid a home. I saw some stuff on social media, this is gonna allow me to raid a home. No, we have to still abide by the law. Police department still has to apply for a warrant, a judge has to sign it and review it. We're responsible for what we do, at least supposedly. So,
that's a lot of people's concerns, they're feeling
Right.
that this may be something where it's a no warrant needed.
but understand, the law was on the books 100 years, and we didn't do that. Okay? We didn't do that, use that same law to raid homes. So that, I hear that raiding home thing, it's not what this is all about.
And last, I know this is a discussion that we're all having, and it's a wonderful discussion, but I would like to know, Henry, where is Alderman Abdus Mir and Alexis Keith?
I would like to know that too. They
They
don't respond.
represent the affected areas.
I don't know, do you know where they are?
You're the chair, that's why I'm asking you.
They did not respond. So it's as good as I can do is hopefully they would reach out to say they're not going to be there. Is that it?
Yes.
Jody, and then another hand in the back.
I'm Joan Hunt, I live on Columbia Street in Hudson. I just think that we're looking at this whole thing the wrong way. We know that quality of life and broken windows policing doesn't work.
Do we know that? Do we know that?
There's a lot of research that proves that that's the case.
There's other research that says it does, but that's okay. I'm sorry to
Of
interrupt.
course, but I think what we should be looking at is innovative community policing models, which I'm sure are presented at many of the conferences you go to, Chief Moore, and are plenty in other cities and communities, because I think what we're talking about is trying to address what the root issue of all of this violence and these activities are, right? So, we're just looking at punishing people, and we're saying the landlords, but actually the collateral consequences of this will punish the tenants, and we already know we have a huge homeless issue in our community and in our county, and we're just going to be pushing people out to where? You know,
Understand, Joan, that we don't go into a home and slap a ticket on. We go repeatedly. Please get inside. Please turn down the music. Please stop drinking in public. I don't think anyone can say that HPD has come down and just automatically raided homes for these minor petty offenses. We respond over and over again, and we establish that. So clearly, the people doing this behavior must share some responsibility.
But what we're doing right now is looking at ways to make that easier, right?
Make what easier?
Punishing the people who
The law is currently on the books for these different things. This is also bringing in a way to bring in the person responsible for the conduct, the overall responsibility, whether it be a landlord, person in charge of the building.
But you've also mentioned the need to want to establish better community relations. This is not going to help you get that, right?
It will with the neighbors who have been complaining about.
Yeah, with your neighbors, but it's not getting to the root issue of what you're trying to address here.
Correct.
So all I'm saying is that I think we should be looking at alternative community policing strategies that may be effective, that have worked in other communities. That's my recommendation.
Thank you. I saw another hand.
Claudia Bruce, 308 State Street. I just wanted to ask, who establishes intent? The law, the police, who establishes intent?
We have to have probable cause establishing intent and then prove it in a court of law. So again, like any crime, you know, we have to come up with the evidence of intent and then present that in a court of law for a person to be found guilty.
Is that already there? Is it already, I mean, you do that now.
The culpability in different crimes varies. Sometimes it's recklessness, sometimes it's intent. I intend to harm you. We have to establish, before we can make an arrest, we have to establish, we can have to prove in a court of law that I intended to harm you. That's the same thing here. We have to prove through a course of conduct a person intends to disregard this law and intends to have these kind of premises.
Chief?
But that's the landlord. The person who, the tenant.
The determination of intent is irrelevant. it happens the same way under the penal law. Again, this is a state law we're talking about, not a local law. Under the state law, intent can be inferred by the repeated activity after some notice. That's why I said 240.45 seems to require some notice, but it doesn't provide a framework for the notice. That's why the Syracuse law seems so strong, because it does create this framework and this way for communication to occur and requires it. Intent can be inferred by repeated actions, but what I learned today in my research on 240.45 is that while it can be inferred, the elements that provide the inference have to be unequivocal, non-hearsay elements. So it can't be like, well, the neighbors said. It has to be there was direct observation of, and then there was a communication which was ignored, and then a second communication which resulted in somebody flipping somebody else off. And at that point, when it became, and then the arbiter, as always, are the courts, right? Because of separation. The police are only the law. The courts have to do the interpretation and the application. Is that answer your question?
Yeah, it's complicated.
It is complicated.
Sounds complicated.
A little bit, it is a little bit, but it's criminal, so it's hard, there's a lot of steps, because you can deprive somebody of their freedom. That's the much bigger issue, really, is putting somebody in jail for up to 90 days, and each day, under the state law, each day that you're ignoring the police is another infraction. So if you do that 10 days in a row, you're looking at almost 3 years.
Well, I would like to reiterate what Joni said, which is about community policing. We really need to embrace this discussion.
I think you need all of these things.
Well, we do, but it just seems like community policing is sometimes down on the list.
Well, understand you have 12 patrol officers. Okay, I would love
You don't have
nothing
police
better.
officers.
And people that know me, I'd rather be in my office, I'd rather be out in this beautiful city talking to people. That's what I enjoy most about the job. The typical community policing model doesn't work in a small department. I have to make police officers that are the community, okay, that you trust, that know are honest, they're not going to trump up charges on you, that are going to treat you with respect. It's kind of a internal way of doing it. That's the goal. To have established details in a standardized CPOP model, we don't have the resources. I'd be glad to have them. I'd like to have a 5-person detail to simply enhance community relations. We just don't have it. And my method is to try to establish a department that's trustworthy. And if people trust your police department, they'll have faith that we're doing the right thing.
When I look at this, and I think about the budget of Hudson, the police department is 1/3 of the budget. And I think if somehow the community had a budget of that to apply to youth programs, community access to seniors, whatever, I just think it would be, because I hear from you, and I certainly respect your department, that you never have enough. Well, believe me, this community and its community efforts doesn't have enough. And it just seems out of whack sometimes, and you must see that.
But understand the department doesn't simply address criminal matters. We get a whole, we're not talking about the 20 or so police calls we have per day, 19.2 or something like that. We also address a whole bunch of other things that are not just police, typical form of police work. We provide more than just arresting people, and I just hope folks can recognize that.
Well, I think also business owners provide a lot more than just running their business. And you've talked to business owners who do all kinds of community outreach, just communicating with people or helping people out if they come and they say, I need $10 for a meal or whatever people come for. So it works on both ways for everybody, not just the police department.
Thank you. A gentleman in the back who's had your hand up, and then
Chief, this is really related to you, Chief. I really believe, from what I've seen in the last couple of years, Hudson has made very, very positive changes. And it's been terrific. It's really been a wonderful thing to watch and behold. It scares me as a property owner, and I have more than one property in Hudson, that what I see happening is really besmirching the city. And it's really creating an aura from a business and a commercial point of view that is totally negative for what we're trying to accomplish in this city. And if we know where the problems lay, and obviously you do, because I mean, when you had the conversation with my wife and I, there was no question in my mind that you knew what the problem was. It's just a matter of how to address the damn thing. And I guess you're so short on resources, you can't really throw enough resources at it to just really, you know, watch it all the time, 24 hours a day.
It's not a matter of, in an investigation of this size, the Hudson Police Department would never have enough resources, and I don't think we need, I'm not advocating for that. I don't want a 500-man police department. I would like to have a 12-man police department. We bring in the resources that we need from larger departments, and that's exactly what we've done.
But if you have it isolated into an area where you know the problem is isolated to one area, it's like a cancer, you know, you attack that one area. I mean, I would assume that's logic. And I'm assuming you're doing that in some way, matter of form.
Yes.
But I guess if there was enough police presence, or somebody saw a uniform on the street, you know, in New York, in the city,
right,
when I was living there, I used to see these people who were volunteer policemen. Now, they weren't really policemen, they really weren't part of the PD. But, you know, there were just some volunteers who walked around with a uniform and a badge, and they had a radio. If there was a real problem, they called the real policeman, so to speak. But, you know, maybe that's the kind of thing we need, some community, you know. I don't know. I'm just reaching. I'm just saying, we know it's an isolated area. How do we attack it? How do we attack it?
Thank you for your comment. We don't do part-time. That's basically it. We don't.
We're talking about ideas. That's all right.
But it's not a terrible idea. We're just as we are organized on HPD, they don't hire any part-time employees. Joni and Myron and a couple more, and we'll try to get some of these written down and move on.
I was just going to say that I've seen some wonderful examples of officers in the Hudson Police Department participate in what looks like community policing as part of their duties every day, in just the way that they interact with people and speak to people and respect people. And I think that if that can become part of the culture and climate of the department as a whole, that we would all be better off. You know, I think it's kind of left up to the officers, and I don't know what kind of training goes on, so if I'm missing something, forgive me. But I have seen officers get out of their car and speak to people and interact with kids and really participate in the community every day.
But John, let me just get in. Your department is unlike what folks here probably remember. Our average age is 5.5 years on the job. So it's changed, okay, a lot in the last couple of years with all the retirements and stuff. So we have a really unique opportunity to make what you're talking about the norm, okay? And then folks will recognize that. And we're almost there. When we talk about the police budget and coming up to full staffing and having the additional patrols go on foot patrol and bike and stuff. I've even been on a bike, if you can imagine that. It looks ridiculous, but I'm out there. The idea is to integrate this into your average patrol is going to, and that's what we're trying to do. It's just, it's one of these things, it just takes some time.
Thank you. Sir.
I always say something people don't like. First, I want to say, I think the police department is great. I have never had a problem with the police department, and I have people that have retired from it that I consider friends. I'm concerned on a social level, because what I'm hearing now is an us and them. And I know people personally who smoke grass on Allen Street, but nobody's talking about how a dozen people get high on Allen Street. I'm not looking for applause, because I'm really concerned. I'm watching the country I love and the town I chose to move into, and I'm seeing the thing that I call benign bigotry.
Yes.
And I'm concerned because I think that we're going to survive as a single community, or it ain't gonna happen. And yes, do we have crime, and am I upset about all these shootings that happened in the last one? Absolutely, scares the hell out of me. I don't wanna be a guy caught in the middle of this crap, you know? And so I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm very concerned about the us and them that's starting to feel like it's happening in this town.
Thank you. So, are there any other comments?
I'm just saying, Myron, you know, as a fellow dope smoker, when I first read the first drafts, you know, I was concerned because I thought they were describing my house. But I don't think that's really what's meant by it. And I don't think it's about people smoking pot any more than it is about drinking beer. It's about what they do afterwards. And it's simply a tool, again, for the police department to be able to do something, you know. I don't live anywhere near the problems at all. In a tiny little city, these problems don't affect me. Personally, my office is in the second ward, as you know, but coming and going, I don't have any problems, and I don't feel unsafe in my front yard or my backyard. I don't think my neighbors do. You can ask one of them here. But I hear from people who do live in those neighborhoods that are affected by this, and I hear they're very frightened, and I understand that. And we can talk all day about, you know, the sociological this and the legal that, and they're not invalid. But at the end of the day, people are really afraid, and they're asking the police to help them. And the police are saying, we don't really have anything in the middle. We have a useless law and we have a penal law. But what do we do in the meantime to provide some relief? And I think that was really the impetus. The police are frustrated. They bring the frustration to the committee. The committee throws up its hands because the law on the books is not so good. And or, you know, we can say all day that there are injustices. I know that. I know that. I've probably been arrested more than most people in this room. And I've probably had my grief with the police department in this town more recently than most people in this room. And I know things go sideways sometimes. And I'm not going to be voting on this law, you know. But I think that that's what we're trying to do, is to craft something that will work in that middle ground. And if there is a problem, if it's being overzealously applied, that's what the courts are there for. I mean, that's the system of government that we all kind of agreed on here. That the courts would be a check on the police. And the legislature, no, we didn't?
No, but John, I'm not saying that the police are overzealous or that this potentially leads to that. What I am saying is there are signals that point communities, and those are the things I'm much more concerned about than I am about the aggressiveness of the police department.
I don't disagree with you, Mark.
You know,
I don't disagree with you. I absolutely, listen, as a middle-aged white guy, I hear it. It's a lot easier for me than it is for my brother-in-law or my nieces and nephews who are dark. Okay? It's a lot easier for me to go through this life. No question.
Thank you. One or possibly two more. Actually, the two we haven't heard from yet.
Just real quick, Melanie Flannery. I'm new to the area. I just wanted to speak about gentrification quickly, because I had previously lived as like a first wave gentrifier of so many neighborhoods, and this is the stuff that makes gentrification happen. White folks move into new neighborhoods, predominantly people of color neighborhoods. They're too scared to knock on their neighbors' doors. They call the police, make a noise complaint, and then suddenly there's a lot of cops in the neighborhoods making all kinds of violations and and then suddenly these people of color are getting kicked out of their apartments, and the rents get raised, and white folks move in, and it changes an entire neighborhood. And while it may just be 6 houses that are the problem, once those 6 houses get full of white folks for higher rent, it changes the entire neighborhood, it displaces all of these people. It's a totally messed up situation. Hudson already has a crazy gentrification situation. It's a messed up thing to do. I think that the HPD should look into some implicit bias training, as well as rewording the language in this law before putting it into law.
Thank you. Ma'am, and then...
Oh, I got here late, so I missed it, but I did read something about this a while ago. As far as noise, you have to remember, poor people don't have the money to go to Mexican radio, KMIA, the movies, so they socialize. And that's where you get some of the noise in the backyards or hanging out on the front steps. They don't have anything but their mouth and each other, so they communicate, have fun that way. So I think on Friday nights, there really shouldn't be a noise cutoff to maybe 1 o'clock. Everybody goes out on Friday nights, or people socialize. The rest of the nights, what is the noise, what is the time?
10 p.m. I think.
10, okay, well
I
that's...
think that's any night of the week, right? Yeah, weekends.
Yeah, even weekends.
Right.
Yeah.
10 p.m.
Well, yeah, but Friday nights, it's tradition.
Yeah, but some people work Saturday.
So they have to, yeah, but the people, local people, I don't think mind too much if stuff is going on. And the city people, they're used to all the noise in the city, the jackhammers, the horns all night. I mean, it's horrendous. So they come up here and want peace and quiet, but hey, people around here have to go out and party and talk and have some fun on Friday nights too, after they work or whatever. So I don't think there should be any noise thing until like 12, 1 o'clock on a Friday night.
Thank you, Karen. Ma'am, and then sir, and we'll
She pretty much said what I
wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you.
I also want to point out, I want to share with my neighbors, from what I've been hearing, I don't think this law is really about noise or smoking marijuana. The houses and people in question are criminals that have been arrested many times. This is not marijuana, it's heroin and crystal meth, opioids,
weapons,
and guns, and there are also users who go to certain houses. I haven't witnessed this, but neighbors on my street have told me the users, young kids, in their teens, early 20s, they buy the drugs and they park their car right across the street in daylight hours. They smoke up, and one of the neighbors has two kids, two boys under 10 years old. The boys walk by the car and they ask their mother what's going on. I mean, that's what's happening. It's not marijuana. I don't think anyone...
The language of the law says noise.
Right. Look, they
say... Well, the language of the law we have not drafted yet, so we're still...
That's right.
So
quite preliminary.
Look, I agree with you. I feel that this law would be okay as long as it was very specific. For example, similar to the Syracuse law that you suggested, and it shouldn't be about marijuana or noise. I think it's not really about that. It's really about more serious crimes going on in the city, involving drugs and hardcore drugs like crystal meth.
Thank you very much. If no one else has any other comments?
Just quickly, if I understand what we're attempting to do, I mean, crystal meth and opioids and heroin, we can bust those guys. If they're sitting in the car with a crack pipe, we can lock them up.
Take a picture.
What?
That's what I did. Take a picture if they're out in front of your house. I mean, there is no grand solution.
So, unless I'm misunderstanding, the thing we're trying to do and trying to engage landlords is something slightly different. Now, I'm not saying that the same crimes aren't happening in the same place, but it's not necessarily that, that noise, or, forget the marijuana. It's not necessarily that. It may just be a loud party of boisterous group. And one of our other problems in this town seems to be, or at least I keep hearing it all the time, about affordable rentals. How are we going to put people up with affordable rentals? Well, the people that made investments in buildings that have 2 or 3 apartments in them for hopefully there's still affordable rentals. Other people that we're trying to give another due diligence to. So it's not a simple issue here.
Not at all.
Just very quickly, the problem in our community, you know, from what I see, and as a man in recovery and a convicted felon, is drugs, but that drugs are not the problem. That is not the problem. It's a symptom of a problem. The shooting of people is not the problem. That's a symptom of a problem. And what we're doing here, I think, is great, a conversation about this stuff. But what saved my life as a homeless man on the street was someone came up to me and said, "Hello, how are you today?" I was walked by hundreds of people all the time, but someone stopped and said hello. And in our own community, that person sitting in the car smoking crack needs to be said hello to. You can lock them up. Sure, they're going to come out and smoke crack.
Well, it's not that, I'm sorry to
And
interrupt
you can lock up the person shooting people, and they're going to come out and shoot people. But having a conversation with people is really important. What we're doing here is beautiful. This is great, and I appreciate everyone here and what everyone has to say. But these are people we're talking about. Black, white, Hispanic, Bengali, they're people. They're people, and everyone has problems. And whether you're smoking dope, smoking crystal meth, drinking martinis, drinking nitrogen, whatever the shit is, it doesn't matter. That's not the problem.
And the county has been conducting these periodic meetings throughout the county. I don't know if you noticed that or not.
I've participated.
Right, and I think that's an example of how the conversation is finally opening up on all this stuff.
And it seems like the climate of the police too, you know, is changing with what is happening in Chatham.
And the courts too.
You know, is treating drug addicts as human beings.
Well,
They're not a
I
drug
want to
addict.
point out the court, my brother's court in the town of Livingston started 14 years ago.
Yes.
So the conversation is finally opening up, and I think it just takes time.
And I'm so appreciative of that, and bringing awareness to the problem, because the people on the street who are shooting dope and smoking crack are people, you know, and that's not the problem, and that's hard for people to understand if you haven't struggled with that before. But just say hello to people, you know, knock on the door, knock on your neighbor's door. Don't be afraid of people because of what they look like or if they're high. Say hello, you know. And it seems like I've seen you out in the community saying hello to people, and that's important. That's so important.
My guys understand too, you know, with the Narcan and the other first aid that they've done over the years, they've saved quite a few lives, our patrolmen. And I don't think anyone can say that we've ever targeted addicts. You know, obviously we don't benefit from that. So
the drug problem, you obviously know we're not going to arrest our way out of it.
Of course.
That you're never going to meet the supply end. You have to meet the demand end. And those are people, you know, that both the supply and the demand end are people that need to be embraced.
Thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, that seems like a very poignant place to end. So since we're not in a session, have a great night.